I welcome you to the Top 10 channel. Subscribe to the channel, put a like, and we start the next top. 10 Deadliest Serial Killer Couples by Kill Count. Serial killers are sinister human beings who act out their most twisted desires at the expense of an innocent victim's life. Typically, they choose to kill alone. But what happens when two serial killers not only meet, but also fall madly in love with each other? They see this as a viable method to fight back at the world. Forensic psychologist Tom Powell, who spent more than a decade working for the Vermont Department of Corrections, told NBC. Through the enacting of fantasies in the solitude of their own homes or the usage of pornography that may reflect their deviant interests. These lethal lovers have all chosen to retaliate against the world in the most lethal way conceivable. Brady and Myra Hindley, 5 victims. The Moors murderers, Brady and Myra Hindley, committed some of England's most notorious murders in the previous century. At the chemical company where they both worked in 1961, Hindley met Brady, who studied Nietzsche, Mein Kampf, and other books on Nazi atrocities. Hindley thought she'd discovered a soulmate. Later, when Brady revealed his obsession with committing the perfect murder, Hindley was quick to comply. In 1963, they murdered their first victim, 16-year-old Pauline Reed, who was a school friend of Hindley's sister. Hindley later claimed that she only lured the girl to Saddleworth Moor, waiting in her van while Brady killed the girl before the pair buried her. They murdered 4 more individuals, and Hindley took great pleasure in bringing around a cord she used to strangle one of the victims and playing with it in public. Another frightening aspect of their crimes is that the couple recorded a victim pleading for her life on camera. With the death penalty abolished in England while Brady and Hindley were in custody, Hindley lived out the rest of her life in prison, dying of pneumonia in 2002. Brady followed her to the grave in 2017. Gwendolyn Graham and Catherine May Wood, 5 victims. Gwendolyn Graham and Catherine May Wood, both from Grand Rapids, Michigan, were working as nurses at Alpine Manor when they fell in love and started playing a deadly game with each other. They launched a sadistic thrill-seeking game of suffocating elderly patients in 1987, attempting to spell out the name Murder using the victims' first names. Before their bad deeds came to an end, they only got to E, spelling out Murder. After Graham was sent to another hospital and Wood was concerned that the patients, many of whom were youngsters, would be harmed, she confessed the killings to her ex-husband. The vicious nature of the crimes, the victims' helplessness, the willful targeting of those victims because of that helplessness, the abuse of the caretaker relationship, the pure malice evidenced by taking souvenirs from the victims, and the sheer number of victims, said a Michigan attorney general. When these characteristics are considered together, they depict a truly extraordinary series of horrible atrocities and a culprit more evil than civilized society can bear. The pair were arrested. Wood received 20 years behind bars and Graham landed life in prison. Alton Coleman and Debra Brown, 8 victims. In 1984, Alton Coleman and Debra Brown went on a 2-year-long killing spree, between 6 different states, that left 8 people dead. Their relationship was a master and slave scenario with Coleman ruling over Brown. Before moving on to an older couple who they attacked with a lead pipe, the first 3 victims were between the ages of 7 and 9. All of their victims were African Americans whom they befriended before brutally murdering. They were finally apprehended after one of the victims survived a violent attack and testified in court. Because their heinous crimes took place in so many different states, the prosecution decided to hold their trial in Ohio, where the death sentence was the most severe penalty available. Coleman was executed in 2002 and Brown's sentence was reduced to life in prison. The mother of one victim said of Brown's sentencing, she was right there with Coleman, committing the same crimes. She bears the same responsibility for them, and she should share his punishment. Ray and Faye Copeland 5.12 victims. Ray and Faye Copeland killed 5 drifters at their Missouri farm during the 1980s. When they were convicted of the murders, Ray was 76 years old and Faye was 69 years old, which made them the oldest couple in America to receive the death penalty. Ray was well known for his deception, and he hired the drifters to purchase livestock with forged checks. Ray would buy the cattle and then resell them at a much greater price, killing the nomad in the process. They were finally apprehended when one of the drifters discovered human remains on the farm and reported it to the authorities. Faye's counsel argued that she had nothing to do with the deaths and that her husband had tormented her psychologically. "I begged Ray to please stay out of trouble time and time again," she added. "We already owned our home and had paid off all of our debts. So why would he go back and muck it all up the same way he did before?" That is, until they realized she had created a quilt out of the deceased men's clothing. They both perished in prison. Caril M. Bundy and Doug Clark, 7 victims. Caril M. Bundy and Doug Clark were also known as the Sunset Strip Killers following their sexually charged killing spree around the Los Angeles area in the 1980s. Bundy first met Clark in a bar and he introduced himself as the king of one-night stands. They soon started living together after discovering they both shared dark sexual desires. Clark murdered prostitutes and twistedly presented Bundy with the head of one of his victims as a trophy. The head was preserved in the fridge and utilized for their own heinous sex games. When Bundy began admitting their crimes to a country singer named Jack Murray, who she liked, he got envious. Bundy was then persuaded by Clark to murder her fling, which she did by luring him to a van with the promise of sex before shooting and decapitating him. Bundy finally broke down and confessed to her colleagues about the killing spree. She later told the police it was a situation that started out as a fantasy and just got badly out of control. They both received the death penalty. Charles Starkweather and Caril Ann Fugate, 11 victims. In the late 1950s, 19-year-old Charles Starkweather and 14-year-old Caril Ann Fugate went on a 2-month killing spree that shocked the nation. They murdered 11 people in the states of Nebraska and Wyoming. The victims were all completely at random, of different ages, gender, social standing, and complete strangers, which added to the public's fear of the shooting spree at the time. When vehicles spotted a heated argument between the two on the side of a busy road, they were apprehended. Fugate went up to the deputy sheriff and screamed, "He's going to kill me," when he approached the pair. "He's insane. He just assassinated a man." The news of their detention sent the media into a tizzy. "I always wanted to be a crook, but not this large of one," Starkweather later told the cops. In 1959, Starkweather was executed aged just 20 years old, and Fugate now lives under a new name in Michigan. The crimes later inspired the film Natural Born Killers. Fred and Rosemary West, 12 victims. Fred and Rose West met at a caravan park when she was around 16 years old. Rose worked as a prostitute, at her husband's insistence, and often while he watched. She regularly fell pregnant by both her husband and her customers, giving birth to 8 children in total, as well as looking after Fred's daughter and stepdaughter from previous marriages. Caroline Roberts, a beauty queen who was abducted and raped before fleeing their home in 1973, was penalized for indecent assault. The duo quickly recognized that if they wanted to keep committing crimes, their victims should not be permitted to relate their stories. Their customary strategy was to offer a woman on the street a ride home, then murder her at their home. The body would later be buried in a cellar or in the rear garden. Women traveling alone at night were more likely to take a lift from a couple than from a single male driver, hence Rose's gender was key in permitting the two to commit their crimes. Finally, in 1995, they were convicted of murder and sentenced to life. Fred killed himself while in custody pending his trial, and Rose will live out the rest of her days behind bars. Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck, 20+ victims. Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck became known as the Lonely Hearts Killers after luring their unsuspecting victims through Lonely Hearts ads in the late 1940s. It is believed during their murder spree they killed as many as 20 women. Fernandez was so taken with Beck's unconditional love for him that she left her own children behind to be with him. She pretended to be Fernandez's sister when they enticed the girls back to their house, and the victims felt safe knowing there was another lady in the house, so they consented to remain the night. They hid the bodies in the basement, But when the victims' families became concerned that their loved ones had vanished, the authorities were able to link the disappearances to the pair. They were both sentenced to the electric chair and got the death penalty. "I want to shout it out, I love Martha," Fernandez exclaimed just before they died. "What does the general population think about love?" Beck also admitted to her love, saying, "My narrative is a love story. But only those who have been tortured by love understand what I'm talking about. I'm not cold, heartless, or foolish. I am a woman who has always had and will always have a wonderful love. My feelings for Raymond have only grown stronger as a result of my confinement in the death house." Inessa Tarverdiyeva and Roman Prokopyev, 30-plus victims. Married Russian couple Inessa Tarverdiyeva and Roman Prokopyev murdered at least 30 people during their 6-year reign of terror. Shockingly, Inessa's 2 daughters from her first marriage, 25-year-old Victoria Tarverdiyeva and 13-year-old daughter Anastasia, also took part in all the crimes. As a daily job, they carried out robberies targeting the residences of wealthy families. Dmitry Chudakov, his wife Irina, and their 2 children were murdered by the family in 2009, using a semi-automatic weapon. The Tarverdiyevas were only allowed to keep a camera, laptop, and hairdryer. Inessa's own goddaughters were among the other victims. She was aware that their father enjoyed hunting and had a gun collection in the house. Before obtaining the firearms, the family tormented the 2 teenage girls and gouged out their eyes. Eventually, they were captured by the police. The father died during the shootout with police, but Inessa and her daughters are currently serving their sentences in prison. Speaking of the murder spree, the matriarch of the family said, "It's just like another day at the office." Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole 6, 100-plus victims. Lovers and companions Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole were serial murderers who admitted it. Lucas had a terrible and violent childhood. His mother pushed him to cross-dress at a young age, which caused him to be rejected by all of his friends. Even worse, his mother was a working prostitute who forced Lucas to observe her with clients. Toole, too, grew up in an abusive household, and the 2 immediately became kindred spirits, with a deadly twist, when they met in a soup kitchen. Toole was swayed towards murder and joined Lucas as an accomplice during his killing sprees. Lucas's first kill was strangling to death 17-year-old Laura Burnsley, who had refused his sexual advances. Toole later confessed to joining Lucas in 108 murders, and Lucas confessed to more than 360 murders. The actual victim count is still unknown. Toole died behind bars of cirrhosis in 1996. Lucas was sentenced to death row, but in 2001, he was found dead in prison from heart failure aged 64 years old. His grave in Texas was left unmarked due to threats of vandalism. Subscribe to the channel and like it. There are still many interesting stories ahead.